that lit the fire we're in. Jesus. The match that lit the fire we are in. We are currently, you and I, in the fire as believers in Jesus Christ. Jesus said in the first verse I read, I came to bring fire to the earth. You and I are in that fire. You and I, we know what it's like on those days to ask, why am I going through this? Why do I have to deal with this trouble in my life? Why do I have to weather this storm and try to keep on keeping on in the midst of all the trouble and anguish? Problems here and problems there, problems away, problems at home, problems on our job, problems wherever we look. And we ask ourselves, why am I going through this? We're going through this because we are in the fire that Jesus is talking about. 1 Peter, the first chapter, beginning at the 5th verse, going through the 7th verse, says this, you are being protected by the power of God through faith for a salvation ready to be revealed in the last time. In this you rejoice, even if now for a little while you have had to suffer various trials, so that the genuineness of your faith, being more precious than gold, that though perishable, is tested by fire, may be found to result in praise and glory and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed. We, you and I, are going through the fire that Jesus was talking about. You're not saying amen, but I'm believing that in your heart you're saying amen, because you know what I'm talking about.
Amen.
We struggle in this life. It is not something that we should look at as if it is something out of the ordinary for us. It is something that we should, as believers in Jesus Christ, expect. That fire that Jesus was talking about, that he came to bring, was kindled in the early church. In the early church, I mean in those very first centuries, first and second and third centuries, when the church was persecuted, when it was illegal for those first Christians to even claim to believe in Jesus Christ in the Roman Empire. Jesus said, he added after that, I came to bring fire to the earth, and oh, how I wish it were already kindled. Those of us old enough, and maybe all of us, know what it is to have kindling. That kindling wood that you have to have in order to start the fire that we had to start years ago. Some of us just to stay warm or to cook. We had to have the kindling wood, that small wood that we put to when the fire is very delicate so that the fire will not go out and so it can begin to build. The early church was that kindling. Imagine you're in the Roman Colosseum about 100 AD. You've just taken your seat at the garden, at the gates. In the middle of the arena have opened. Stepping out into the sun, scorched dirt, is a small group of men looking shabby and unkempt, yet strangely calm and collected. The sun bears down on the charred ground as the crowd gets to its feet and begins to roar, as they all know full well what's coming. But you don't get up with them. You stay in your seat and continue to look on among these strange men, which people around you are starting to call Christians. The bloodthirstiness in the eyes of those around you is most disturbing, but when looking upon the men on the arena floor, you feel a strange sense of serenity. Just who are these men? A moment later, the gates open again, and the lions make their move, and it becomes clear what their prey is. A few minutes later, the sun the sun-scorched ground is soaked with blood, the blood of the martyrs. Most of the crowd is in a frenzy, but for you something is different. Something has taken root in your heart, as these men cried out to someone named Jesus. It was scenes like this that caused the early Christian writer, who was name is shortened to Tertullian, whose name was much longer, Quintus Septimius Florens Tertullianus, to write these words, which are much quoted in Christian realms. From the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. That happened many times, that scene did. And it didn't serve the purpose of snuffing the church out as the Romans hoped it would. What it did was exactly the opposite. It caused the church to grow. Amen. As people witnessed the calmness and the serenity and the confidence and the faith of those who were being persecuted, something happened inside of them. And they became believers in Jesus Christ. That was the kindling wood. From the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. And that's still going on today in some places, something similar, maybe not to that extent in most places, but in 2014, Christianity Today reported that 74% of the world's population live in a country where social hostilities involving religion are high. 64% of the world's population live where government restrictions on religion are high. And that's from a study by the Pew Research Center. But the early church was the kindling wood. But Jesus is the match that lit the fire. He said, I have a baptism with which to be baptized, and what stress I am under until it is completed. I wonder what Jesus meant by that when he talked about the stress he was under. I can imagine that just being God in human form itself would be a lot of stress. Being in that human body, which we all struggle with and try to struggle against, but he's always struggling against that body. Or maybe it was the stress of thinking about what he knew was coming. That at the end of his life in that body, he would hang on a cross. But I think what he really meant was the stress that we sometimes put a match under. Because a match can't light unless there is stress, unless there is friction, unless there is resistance. And I think what Jesus was talking about from the context of the rest of Scripture, I don't think he was worried about dying. I think he had mastered that body. But what frustrated him the most was people like you and me. He had to deal with people even people who were following him, that at times showed so little faith. That's the stress I believe he was under. The stress of his good versus the world's evil. His justice versus injustice. His kindness versus hatefulness. His love versus fear. Always and everywhere he went, there was opposition to him. He struggled with that. I think one of the most profound ways that we express our stress is we utter those two words, how long? From the little child in the car that has to go farther than they've ever been before, are we there yet? How long? How long do I have to deal with this? How long do I have to go through what seems to be this hell on earth that I deal with? How long? Jesus said it once when the disciples were trying to heal the young boy and they couldn't heal him. And Jesus came up, he had been away, and he came up. And the man, the father of the child, told him, said, we brought him to, son falls into the fire and he falls out, and we brought him to your disciples and he couldn't. And Jesus says, how long? How long, O faithless and perverse generation? am I to be with you? How long am I to bear with you? But he hung in there. He continued on his journey, and eventually the light, the candle, or the match was lit. Just imagine what it would be like. You and I, we struggle with what we see in life. We struggle with how the evil seem to prosper. We struggle with that. We struggle with how people who claim to be religious don't act like what they claim to be. We struggle with that. Just think if you were God and you had to deal with that. If you had to watch the evil prosper. If you had to sit by and watch people claim to know God who know so little about God. People who claim to be followers of him who have no clue what faith is. Just think the stress he was under. And then Jesus goes into explaining exactly what he means by the fire that people will have to endure, believers will have to deal with. First he talks about, he says, do you think that I have come to bring peace to the earth? And people are like that today. You know, the Jews back then, they thought that when the Messiah came, immediately after the Messiah came, there would be this great time of peace, that they would reign, that their country would be given back to them, the Romans would be thrown out, and everything would be great. Jesus said, you think I came to bring peace? People are like that today. We believe, lots of us as Christians, that everything is supposed to be a piece of cake, just a smooth ride. No bumps, no potholes, no trouble, everything. So how long do we have to deal with this? That's the wrong way to think, Jesus says. I didn't come to bring peace, I came to bring division. Division, it's not what you think. It's not a piece of cake. It's not a smooth ride. It's not smooth sailing. It's different from what you think. There's going to be trouble. There's going to be division. Even in the same household, mother against daughter, daughter against mother, father against son, son against mother, mother-in-law against daughter-in-law, daughter-in-law against mother-in-law. There is going to be great trouble once this fire is lit.
Amen.
You must choose. Jesus is so close, so personal, so important that he divides family members. He divides people who have been friends. When one chooses Jesus and the other doesn't, there is a great division between them, no matter how close they are.
Amen.
I have seen that proven out in many ways. But we as believers, we think everything is supposed to be smooth sailing. Preachers don't talk about that because that'll upset people. Somebody might not come to church. Don't go down that road. Don't say anything controversial. Don't bring up the things that Jesus talked about, justice. Don't talk about justice. Don't talk about how bad hate is. Don't call people out. Don't do that. You might hurt somebody's feelings. There might be trouble. We value other things more important, from our political party to our football team. But Jesus says, I will divide Republican from Republican, Democrat from Democrat, Steeler fan from Steeler fan, Cowboy fan from Cowboy fan, black from black, white from white. You don't get to stick together anymore. I am your Lord. You answer to me. I am master, I am king. You must choose. If you want peace and calm and tranquility and to get along with everybody and to never have any division and never be challenged on anything, go somewhere else away from Jesus Christ. That's not who he is.
Amen.
That's not who he is. I didn't come to bring peace. I came to bring division, a fire. That's the fire you are in. The trouble that you have. and it is to test your faith. And Jesus then uses a parable or an analogy, a comparison. He says, you look out and you see a cloud in the west, and rain's coming. You feel a hot breeze from the south, and it's going to be a hot spell coming. You hypocrites. And he says to them, you hypocrites. And you know why he says you hypocrites? The same reason he says you hypocrites to Christians today. We want to claim the match, but we don't want the fire.
Amen.
We want to say, oh, King Jesus. But we don't realize he's a servant when he was on this earth. He was no king. He was treated horribly on this earth. He served. His disciples came to him and said, when you get to your kingdom, let us sit one on the right and one on the left. I came to serve. That's who we are while we are here. We want to bypass that, go all the way, do not pass go all the way to the kingdom of heaven and sit at the right hand and the left hand of God Almighty. And he's saying, wait a minute. Wait a minute. It doesn't work like that. We want the crown, but not the fill in the blank. Cross. We want the crown, but not the cross. We don't want to be challenged. We don't want to struggle. We don't want anybody to say something that's going to hurt our feelings, cause us any trouble. Jesus is saying to them, when you see this thing, you know that thing's coming. When you see me, you know fire is coming. When you get close to me, there's going to be some fire. There's going to be some trouble because people won't like it. People will not like what you stand for. They want you to pat them on the back. Jesus is saying to his listeners, it is important that we know what time it is. Because when we know what time it is, we know what's coming next. When we know what time it is, we know what's coming next. If we think that this is the time of ease and comfort and all happiness, we don't know what's coming next. If we realize this is a time of fire and trouble and tribulation and the cross, then we can know what's coming next. And it's a good thing that's coming next. It's like, when in the springtime, when all that pollen settles on the ground and on the cars, it's like we're in that time. And then that big rainstorm comes and it's all gone. You see it washed down into the gutters. We're in that time when that pollen is here, that sin clings so closely to us. But the day is coming when it will all be washed away, when Jesus will take care of that. We hear people talk about the calm before the storm. This is the storm before the calm. This is not the calm before the storm. There's always a calm after the storm. Sometimes there's a calm before a storm. But when you're in the midst of the storm, you have a pretty good idea there's a calm coming. The storm will be over one day. That's where we are today, and that's what we need to realize. So my prayer for you today is that instead of resisting the fire, which we have a tendency to do because fire makes you uncomfortable if you get close enough to it. It is not a comforting thing, it is a discomforting thing. Not a pleasant thing, it's an unpleasant thing. But what I say to you today is allow yourself to be uncomfortable. Let some unpleasantness get as much unpleasantness as you can get. Go through that trial by fire. so that you can draw nearer to him.
Amen.
Because today's fire is just a small thing compared to the fire that is to come. Because after that calm, the Bible tells us, there's the storm, then there's the calm, and then there is a hurricane coming. There's going to be a judgment today. And the fire won't be just like the fire we have to deal with here today. Where usually we get up the next day after we've gone through the fire of yesterday, and we'll go through the fire of today, and we'll get up tomorrow. When that fire comes, that is the coming fire, after the calm, after this fire, nobody's getting up from that fire who hasn't survived this fire, who hasn't gone through the struggle in this life. It makes me think of that story in Daniel, the 3rd chapter, where Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the 3 Hebrew boys, and Nebuchadnezzar had built an idol, and they were supposed to bow down to it at a certain time of day. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said, "We will not bow down. Our God is great enough that God can deliver us." Nebuchadnezzar said, "I'll put you in the fiery furnace." They say, "We won't bow down. God can deliver us, but even if he doesn't deliver us, we're not going to bow down." And Nebuchadnezzar got so angry, the scripture says he heated the fiery furnace up 7 times hotter. That's what we're talking about in judgment. You think this fire is something. You don't want to face that fire. It is important that we deal with the fire that we have here. And what I would also like to say to you in closing is to realize what the fire does here. And what Jesus is calling us to do and to be. He's calling us to draw close to him, to be like him. We go all the way back to the beginning of Matthew on the Sermon on the Mount and Luke's Sermon on the Plain. And I think we find there what God is calling us to be. What he's calling us to let the fire do to us. When he says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." That's what he's calling us to. Blessed are the peacemakers. That's what he's calling us to. Blessed are the pure in heart. That's what he's calling us to. To let the fire so burn around us that we become like that. The pure in heart, not the hateful in heart. Not the double-minded, not the triple-minded. The peacemaker, not the person who sows division, who goes around gossiping and talking about other people and trying to say, "Oh, I want you to hate this one because I hate that one." The poor in spirit, not the high and mighty, but the poor in spirit. Those who mourn, not those who are always happy and giddy, but who mourn for the situation and condition of the world. The meek, not the warlike. The merciful. That's who God calls us to be. That's what he calls us to stand up for. And then also those who hunger and thirst for righteousness' sake. And finally he says, "And blessed are you when they persecute you and say all manner of evil against you falsely, on my account. For so did they the prophets, and great is your reward in heaven."
Amen.
That's who he's calling us to be. People who will stand up for right and righteousness wherever we are. Not people who will cower away and say, "Oh, don't go there because that will cause me some pain and trouble." And I pray that we will be that type of church, that you will be that type of person. The story is told in 320 AD, there was a group of Christians who, because they would not bow down to the Roman gods, were put out in the cold to die. There were 40 of them. And one of them apostatized and ran away, they said. But there was a guard watching them, and the guard was so overwhelmed by the peace and the calmness of the other 39 that he tore off his cloak and he got down on his knees with them and began singing hymns, waiting to see Jesus in heaven. That's what God is calling you to do today. If you haven't done it before, to tear off that cloak to get in there with those who are enduring the pain and the suffering and the cross and the trouble and the tribulation, and to stand with them so that on the other side of this trouble, you'll be able to participate in what God has for us. And why would it be that any less of us? What would make us think that we who run away from trouble would be able to stand in the same heaven with believers such as that? Amen.
Amen.